you very much for this. And I think we can start. So it's a fourth dialogue organized by Living Innovation Project in the series of challenges of remote working. Today we will talk about new careers, skills, and remote working post-COVID. And my name is, as I said, Svetlana Ivanova. I'm research at ISINOVA, Institute for Studies for the Integration of System. And today's dialogue we will be moderating together with Andrei Martinuzzi, who's a professor at the Wien University, and he's a coordinator of the Living Innovation Project. Hello, Andrei.
Hello. Also a warm welcome from my side. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are.
Yes, I think always relevant. We have participants from all around the world. Couple of rules for today. So in case you have some questions, please go ahead and write them in the chat. And as moderators, we will summarize the question and address them to our speakers. And we'll ask you to mute yourself for now, but later on you will have opportunity to unmute yourself and participate in the dialogue. But for now, just for avoiding background noise, we'll ask you to do this. And we will be very glad to see you. So please switch on your camera if you feel like. If you would like to be not seen and heard, you also can follow us on YouTube. But yeah, we're glad to see you here. And in case you have some technical problems, please write to Heike Vogel-Persson. She's here, and she's a host of the meeting, so you can easily find her. And there is also this number for technical support in case of some problems. And we can go to the agenda of the meeting today. So we'll start with introduction and some background information. And after that, our speakers will go ahead. Anu will start, Anu Madgavkar, with her presentation on skills and reskilling in the new normal. Barbara Stöttinger will go on with careers in the post-pandemic world. And after that, our discussant, Michael Köttritsch, will start the discussion part. After that, we will summarize the questions we have in the chat. So please write the question during the presentation. And after that, we will address them to the speakers. At 5:30, we will start in-depth conversations. So we'll have 3 groups with 3 speakers where you have more opportunity to exchange your experience and ask your questions to the speakers. So we'll have open end to this. And yeah, we will be glad if you will join the conversation part as well. Andre.
So the event today is part of a European project called Living Innovation. It's funded by the European Commission's Horizon 2020 program, started about 3 years ago. And the purpose of this project is to frame responsible innovation as an opportunity and not as an additional burden for industry. We've seen during the last decade the rise of the term responsible research and innovation. It's a special application of the term responsibility that you're quite familiar with in the area of corporate social responsibility in innovation practices, in innovation management, in innovation departments. And in many cases, innovators are, well, quite busy people, quite nervous people, and quite competitive people. And if you tell them you have to be responsible for the future generation, the world, the environment, climate, and so on, many innovators might say, yeah, I know that I'm responsible, but you know, I'm competing with China, I'm competing with Silicon Valley, I can't do it. And this was the starting point of the Living Innovation project, where we said we want to find out if and how responsibility in the area of innovation can be seen as a competitive advantage, as an opportunity for companies. And we're now dealing with such companies because we have several of them in our consortium. In our consortium, there are major companies as Siemens, Infineon, Ericsson, Atos, Telefonica. I think many of them you know. And together with them, we developed a kind of framing for responsible innovation as an opportunity. Next slide, please. So what does it mean, responsibility? Actually, it means responsibility for impacts of a technology, of a service, of a product, of an innovation. There have been some cases where irresponsibility caused quite dramatic problems. Just remember Contagan, remember asbestos, remember the debate about nuclear power. So responsibility for impacts is a very generic responsibility because there might be some future and quite distant impacts. On the other hand, it means to innovate with a purpose, to innovate with a purpose to address grand societal challenges. And it means from a business point of view, you reduce risks and costs, and from a societal perspective, you avoid negative impacts. The second dimension of responsible innovation is with the people and for the people. So it's the responsibility towards stakeholders. And if you involve people and not the usual suspects, if you involve the not so usual innovators, not the techno nerds in urban areas, young, wealthy, and super open towards new products, if you involve the people from low income areas, from people who are not so high educated, people who might be very old, or even children, you might come up with much more better fitting ideas. And there is a third perspective, which means to innovate on a systems level, not to innovate just on the level of a technology, of a product, of a service, but to innovate whole systems. As a matter of fact, nowadays, companies, citizens, policymakers, we all are connected. We are connected in networks, we're connected in systems. Many of these systems simply emerged. We never designed them deliberately, and now is the time to redesign them, because some of these systems, think about the health system, Corona, COVID showed us quite dramatically how this healthcare system has certain kind of flaws. 10 years ago, our financial system nearly exploded, nearly collapsed. And this was not done because there was any kind of terrorist that attacked our financial system. It was a systemic failure. And we want to design systems in the future which are more resilient, which address sustainability issues, and this is the third aspect of responsible innovation. This is the framing that we developed during the last 3 years together with companies, and this way how I think we can explain and responsible innovation to industry. Next slide, please. In the Living Innovation Project, we carried out by now about 100 video interviews. You will find them on our website. We carried out more than 20 webinars and online dialogues. We currently develop a series of responsible innovation blueprints and showcases. There will be a compendium of so-called community interactions because we've done a lot on this virtual community platform. We also organized 20 co-creation labs, so together with citizens, together with companies, and there will be a co-creation toolkit coming out of that. We currently write 3 policy briefs, so we also want to address the European Commission and tell them about what should be done on a policy level. We work on a book, and there are several presentations also this year at major conferences on our findings. Next slide, please.
I will give you some background information for the dialogue we had already. So there were already 3 other dialogues on remote working. We started with a very broad topic on technologies and leadership challenges, where we talk about how to lead a virtual team, emerging technologies which are used for this new leadership, and what role policy can play in this. Then we had other 2 dialogues more specific on technology side. And one on February on trust, surveillance, and artificial intelligence. We talk about trust-based leadership, resilient organizations, and actually responsible surveillance. And on the one in March, we talk about holograms and virtual reality. And it's a new reality for leadership, immersive technologies for remote working, and risks and responsible use. And if you register on our platform in Living in Innovation, I think you did already, you can also find there the recordings of these events. So next slide, please. Today we have the dialogue on new career skills and remote working post-COVID, as you know. And in June, we prepare the dialogue on mental health and burnout prevention. We're still on the level of elaboration of this dialogue, but all the announcement will be on the platform, of course. Thank you.
If you're interested in other topics beyond remote working, there are 3 upcoming events in the Living Innovation Project that might be of interest for you. On April 28th, we will run a webinar how low-income families can co-create innovation. So these are not the usual suspects. In the Living Innovation Project, we ran a series of workshops with families from low-income areas in the United Kingdom, and we experienced how these people can be involved into innovation processes. On May 5th, there is the Smart City Summit, which is a virtual event hosted by the city of Vienna, but organized on a global scale. So it will be also a kind of 2 days online event where we run a 2 hours track on responsible innovation for smart cities. And on May 25th, there will again be a webinar on the topic of innovation tools for blind and visually impaired people. Just imagine you're a facilitator, you organize an innovation workshop, and you open your facilitation toolbox. I think 90% of the tools you can simply leave within the box because they're not suitable if you work with people who are blind or visually impaired. And this means that by using certain tools, you exclude them. And by using other tools, you include them. And with this workshop, we would like to share our experiences and discuss tools for blind and visually impaired people for innovation workshops. Next slide.
So to start the discussion today and exchange of experience, I would like to ask you, which skills did you find you needed the most in the last year? We'll give you a couple of minutes to think, and please write your answer in the chat. interesting answers already. I see about programming, resilience, of course, priority and time management, online moderation from my side, presenting over Zoom, of course, office skills in the Microsoft Office, self-organization from a lot of people actually, self-discipline, true, remote moderation of meetings, indeed, planning and scheduling, resilience, emotional connection through the screen, says Patrico. Really, really a nice one, Patricio. Thank you. Humor, great one. Self-motivation and patience with technology and internet disruption. Of course, we got very dependent on this today. Conducting remote meetings, focus, resilience, optimism, faith, capability building, purpose-driving communication, skill for designing virtual formats, empathy, humor, and optimism. Getting used to hours chosen by other EU countries for remote events. Thank you very much. I think wonderful, interesting answers.
It seems that if you look back on this year of working in a different way, there are some technologies you got used to, you changed some attitudes, and there are also some skills that you trained, that you had to train. So now we looked back. On the next slide, let's look forward. What skills do you think will be key in the future of work? Is COVID now the big game changer or just an episode? If it changes something, what will it change? What skills will be key in the future? Please type into the chat, what skills do you think will be key in the future of work? Could be skills that you already have, could be skills that you lack, could be skills you would like to see with your coworkers. So perhaps there are some skills where you say, well, I got them, but the others? Thank you. Oh, still something coming in. Let's give it a moment. Perhaps some skills might come to your mind after thinking a little bit about it.
I think we can learn a lot from our participants, Sandra.
We could even co-design a whole program on this. It's just like an agenda. So I think that the US Executive Academy is already taking a lot of notes because they are designing different kind of training programs. Perhaps this is in line what we experienced, perhaps not. We will see later. Okay, so let's start with our first presentation.
Yes, let's come to our keynote speakers. We have three wonderful speakers today. Madgavkar, who is partner at McKinsey Global Institute in McKinsey company. She's one of the authors of The Future of Work After COVID-19, and she will present today some highlights of this report. Barbara Stöttinger is Associate Professor at the Institute of International Marketing Management, and she's Academic Director for the Professional MBA Marketing and Sales at University of Vienna. and Michael Köttritsch is head of management and careers at Die Press newspaper. So we'll start with presentation of Anno Madgavkar, and she will talk about skills and reskilling in new normal. The main parts of her presentation will be about what are the main trends that COVID-19 accelerated, which skills will the workforce of the future need, and why adaptability and lifelong learning will be crucial. Hello, Anna. Anna, thank you for joining us.
Hello, hello everybody. Good day to you. I'm delighted to join this forum. I can already see the level of energy and also intuition that's filtering in through the comments about how people have internalized what COVID's done to the world of work and changed what will be demanded of each of us going forward. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and we'll start with a quick presentation. Let me put up some pages. There we go. So this work has come out of the McKinsey Global Institute, which is the economics research sort of think tank. We don't call ourselves a think tank. We're really the economics and business research arm of McKinsey. And labor markets and technology and their intersection is actually a topic that we've been researching and following and building a view on now for several years. So we undertook a global study, started several months ago, and then released the report very recently on what will change after COVID-19 in terms of the world of work. And some highlights from that research is what I would love to present. First, the question of, what are some of these structural changes and what has provoked them? So when we looked at a cross-section of countries, 8 different countries, different regions of the world, we found that there were 3 fundamental groups of trends that were really reshaping the world of work in an enduring way, not just the chaotic upending of work that we saw over the last 1 year, but in a more enduring way. So the first of these is clearly remote work and virtual modes of business interactions, meetings, travel, and so on. And each of these arrows is sort of indicative of the strength of that trend, the enduring nature of it. We do believe from our research that the work from home or the work from anywhere trend is, it's not going to be as all-consuming as we've seen over the last 12 months, but it's certainly a very strong, enduring trend, and we'll end up with a much higher proportion of work from home or work from anywhere than we used to on a pre-COVID basis. And this will have, again, long-term effects on the nature of travel, particularly business travel, which we would expect to be lower than in the past. Although leisure travel might actually just bounce back. That's not an experience that's easily replicable through sort of remote interactions. The second bucket is really e-commerce and different ways of transacting, particularly for consumers, but also for businesses. E-commerce penetration has soared. Along with that, the whole delivery ecosystem, food, groceries, and so on, which might actually go back to closer to the levels prior to the pandemic, because people will still want to go out to restaurants. It's not that that's going to end. But on e-commerce, for sure, there is a strong sense that this has revealed convenience and utility for consumers that people don't really want to get rid of. On the B2B side, we see in particular that lots of interactions around supply chain, sales and marketing, and so on have moved to the virtual realm. And this has been a big push, particularly for larger companies and companies well integrated in global supply chains. And then finally, on automation and AI, we see this as a very strong post-COVID accelerated trend. And we've seen this actually pan out across multiple periods of economic crisis or shock or recession in the past as well. A surge in automation adoption as businesses seek to readjust their operating models. And this is what we would expect as we've surveyed and talked to experts around the world on this topic. So a little bit more now about each of these trends. On remote work, I think a lot of people have talked about remote work. What we did is to look at it at a very granular level, to say that this is actually driven off the individual tasks and activities that you and I and everybody engage in. It's not that everything that we do is possible to do effectively and productively on a remote basis, but certainly some of the time that I spend through my working day can be done remotely, and so on for other folks. So when we look at it bottom up for the entire workforce, what we find is that there is a good 20 to 25% of the workforce across countries who could work 3 to 5 days a week on a remote basis without losing the effectiveness of what they were doing. That's 3 to 5 days of their time, but that doesn't mean it's all of their time. There's still work that you would need to do face to face and physically. But the 20 to 25% is a sizable number. What we should not forget is that 50 to 60% of the workforce across countries is actually in work that's very physical location dependent. And the benefits and joys of remote work are not available to this group of workers. And even for the rest, for the 20 to 25% who could spend most of their time remotely, there are challenges that organizations as well as individuals will face in making this remote work really healthy, sustainable. And there's this whole big question of what's the right hybrid remote working model that organizations will gravitate towards, just given this mix of workforce and mix of tasks that will have to be done going forward. But undoubtedly a major trend that we think will sustain. Now, the second big trend is really around e-commerce and all sorts of digital ways of transacting. We've seen the data shows that the share of e-commerce as a percent of total retail sales volume has actually spiked between 2 and 5 times faster in growth than earlier to the pandemic across any country that you might look at. What goes along with this increase in share, part of this increase was driven, of course, by almost necessity. But what goes along with it is the fact that all our surveys show that consumers across these countries, between 50 to 80% of consumers, depending on the type of service you're talking about, feel that this is a behavior they would like to continue going forward. So people will still go out and shop for groceries and like to feel the fruit before they buy it. But a lot of people have discovered that, they want the convenience. And in tandem with that, we've seen a whole spate of innovation on the supply side to make online services more compelling. And so this is, again, a trend that we think will reshape not just the nature of work in retail stores. So this has some effect on footfalls in retail physical outlets and stores with that moving online, but also leads to shifts in the nature of transportation and delivery-based jobs, which will actually rise, logistics and warehousing jobs, which will actually rise as a result of these trends. And then finally, the third trend that we have observed is the accelerated use of automation and AI. Almost 70% of CXOs across a range of companies that we surveyed believe that this is a fairly dominant trend that they're observing in their own companies. We're seeing different families of technology actually accelerate across all sorts of AI and machine learning based ways of interacting with customers, to the more physical services, which are starting to see service robots, relatively new phenomenon, self-checkout in stores, cleaning and even delivery through service robots. A lot of RPA technologies, which are focused really around the minute you go, one step to remote work, it provokes the thought about what could be automated through that process. And we're actually seeing that through RPA applications. And this is something we expect will increase in the 18 to 24 months going forward, as history has shown us is typically the case across periods of major work disruptions or economic disruptions. Now, long term, the question we asked ourselves is, what does this imply for the shape of employment demand out to 2030? We had a set of scenarios on a pre-COVID basis, based on long-term structural trends in skills and technology and the shape of work. But clearly, COVID has accelerated many of these trends. And the question is, what's going to be the impact in terms of the kind of workers that will be in demand out to 2030. So this is a picture of the US, but the data across several advanced economies is directionally very similar. On the right-hand side, you see types of occupations where labor demand may decline relative to earlier expectations. The orange dot you see is the rate of growth that we would have expected earlier. The bars that you see are now adjusted rates of growth based on COVID accelerated trends. And we do find on the right-hand side that occupational categories that are service-oriented, particularly food services, customer service and sales, are likely to grow more slowly or actually decline in share relative to what we might have thought earlier. Office support, a lot of routine work in offices, as well as production work, is likely to be displaced at a greater pace thanks to the higher automation that we are observing. And this labor displacement is going to need to find other avenues of being deployed. But we do see those other avenues on the left-hand side of this page, which are the growing occupational categories. And a lot of this is certainly to do with health. A lot of it is to do with technology, science, and those kinds of technology intensive types of work, but also more creative and collaborative types of work. The interesting middle income job category that you see on the left-hand side is actually transportation services, which does reflect this new, delivery-based, we will take goods to where consumers are, as opposed to the other natural flow that we're likely to see going forward. So as I said, these might shift in their quantum and magnitude based on the structure of each economy. But directionally, these are some of the important shifts in the nature of employment demand. And these will have big effects on the workforce, on wages, and on skills. If we look at it in terms of how many people are there in occupations which are likely to shrink, and therefore to stay employed, these workers will have to switch occupations and therefore learn new skills in order to stay relevant and be able to deliver those new occupations. We see that number actually rising. It's a sizable number that ranges from about 17 million workers in the US to between 2 and 4 or 5 million workers in many European countries who will need to switch occupations in order to stay employed by 2030. And this could be anywhere from 10 or 15% of the workforce to about 28% of the workforce in the US on the basis of an increase relative to the past. So between 10 and about 25% higher occupational transitions than we might have expected in the past. And transitions are healthy and good and lead to better work and less drudgery and more fulfillment and pay if they are enabled. But at the same time, if they're not enabled on the supply side, if workers don't have the skills to move to the jobs in demand, we will have negative societal outcomes and rising inequality as a result. So for all stakeholders to think about this, it's clearly a big societal and economic question to make these transitions work. And what's interesting is that not all parts of the workforce will be equally exposed to such occupational transitions. But unfortunately, it is groups that are less advantaged who will actually face a larger burden of making these occupational transitions. So from a gender perspective, women, for example, will have likely to have a larger shift or a larger increase in the number of transitions they will need to make. If we think about it age-wise, a lot of younger workers are actually in frontline jobs. The nature of those jobs will shift, and the number of transitions that younger workers will have to make might go up. And similarly, when it comes to education, it's the ones with lower education where we see a larger relative increase in the number of transitions. Across all of this, I think there is a big implication that for the first time in the coming decade, you might actually see more pressure on low pay jobs and almost a declining share of such jobs in economies. It used to be the case that the middle pay jobs were being hollowed out by automation, but now this could also drift downwards to low paying jobs. Finally, the question around skills. I think a lot of the comments we saw in the chat actually resonate with this page that suggests that going forward, the physical, manual, and basic cognitive skills will decline in importance. It's really social and emotional as well as technological skills that will rise. Many examples of these we heard through the chat already. I also want to point out that the category called higher cognitive skills is actually a mix of two types of things. Some quantitative skills, which actually machines are doing better and better, and that's driving the shrinkage. But then there is also creative problem solving, joining the dots, collaboration types of cognitive skills, which are actually rising. So there's a mixed picture there. Companies around the world, the leading ones, are focusing increasingly on the reskilling and redeployment challenge. Lots of examples that we can talk about later, but I think the one message that I would drive here is that there is a shift being seen in terms of moving away from more formal signals of education like degrees, but thinking more about what kinds of skills are really needed in this job, and can we have a very sharp focus on building those kinds of skills and evaluating who might do the job based on specific skills, as opposed to broader degrees that are also more time consuming and may be very difficult actually to spread across the entire workforce. And therefore, this pyramid becomes quite important. I think we are all familiar with these concepts of IQ and EQ and how we've moved the debate around what's needed in skills along this pyramid and upwards. But the future will really be what we're calling AQ, which is, I heard a lot about lifelong continuous learning, being resourceful, a lot of those kinds of skills, adaptability, comfort with change, for both individuals as well as organizations, is going to become increasingly critical going forward. In conclusion, and I hope that a lot of the discussion focuses around these 4 questions, but businesses do have an opportunity to reimagine how we work and not go back to the same models of working, because the COVID accelerated trends have difficult societal implications, but they also have opportunities that they're raising in terms of how to solve those challenges and also how to be more productive and build a more fulfilling workplace. And therefore, companies, organizations really have an opportunity to rethink where we work, how we work, the skills and the culture that we're trying to build. And I look forward to discussing much of this with you. For those interested in the broader research, it's all available online. So I would encourage you just to go to the McKinsey site and look at the Future of Work link, and very much look forward to the discussion coming up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu. Very interesting, informative presentation. And I think a lot of food for thought for all of us. There are already some questions in the chat, and we've made a note of it, so we will come back to this. And actually, some questions already somehow touching upon the argument of changing the career paths. And actually, our second presentation with Barbara Stöttinger, who is Associate Professor at the Institute of International Marketing Management and Academic Director at the Professional MBA Marketing and Sales at University of Vienna, will be dedicated to careers in the post-pandemic world. And Barbara will tell us a bit about remote work, why is it different this time, and career challenges before and after this pandemic situation, and what will careers for managers and executives be like after all the situation. Welcome. Hello, Barbara.
Thank you very much. You have to allow me to share my screen, and then I'm happy to get started. Okay, you should see my screen now, and you should hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. You have highlighted a couple of my roles. The role that I'm here today is Dean of the VIU Executive Academy, and I thought I'd just introduce those of you who might not be as familiar with our operations really briefly, because it's also giving you a background of where my comments on today's topics are coming from. So the VU Executive Academy is Vienna University's of Economics and Business post-experience education center. So we basically work with students who are working full-time, who are advanced in their career already. We call them experts, high potentials, and executives. And we usually work with around 2,500 individuals from over 85 countries in all sorts of different types of programs. So from executive MBA programs to certificate level programs, to short courses, and also together with companies on their executive education needs. So my background basically is working with those people in the classroom, but also with, engaging with them as our alumni, working with companies on their executive education needs. And from these different perspectives, I try to share my insights on the topic today. I wanted to start out with a picture because if you had expected me to come with my crystal ball and tell you what the skills of the future would be and how we get there, then I have to disappoint you to start with. I think what the reason why I chose this picture was basically I see us at the moment, and I talk about the executive education, the executives we are working with in this kind of situation. We have come to a certain point where we see the future, and Anu has highlighted with her facts and figures of where this future could be. But we are still not fully aware of how to get to this future and what it needs and again, I'm looking at an executive perspective here. What it needs to get there. Yeah, what we know is that the jumps that we would usually make, those 2 jumps would not get us across. So we need a new way of looking at things. But I think how exactly, this is where we are still standing. And we have, of course, as we see the other side already, as we have a lot of experience, some assumptions of how to get there. But I think the way how is still under development or under construction, if you so want, but I would share our ideas with that. I sliced the title of the presentation in several parts. First of all, in terms of remote work, then in terms of careers, but then also looking at the before and after situation. So where do we come from and where do we think we will be going? So when we look at remote work, actually something that has been challenging us all over the past year, from corporate perspective, it's not entirely new. Yeah, so there are certain industries, think of IT software developers, who have also in the past for many years worked from home on a global scale and know how to do that. Yeah, so in certain industries, this pattern that we see right now has been part of collaboration, put it that way. We also see companies who were set up by default to work in a distributed way, remote work, if you think of Automatic, the company behind WordPress. I think what makes that different from the situation that we're facing at the moment is that this was by choice. Yeah, so Automatic decided to start and work as a globally distributed company. IT software developers, the way how the culture works, the work works, it makes it possible, and it turned out to be a feasible way of doing things. What we see now is that remote work has become a reality for all companies on a global scale, yeah, by default. So that was not choice, but we all had to, except for certain industries. And I think we also have to realize that, and that might be my Austrian perspective, tourism, event management, yeah, and also from our education programs. These are industries where remote work simply does not work. Yeah, so coming to Vienna remotely is not the same as coming here physically. So what does that mean when we look at careers and skills and our educational program for the target group of mid-level managers, senior managers who are in the driver's seat to a certain extent to all of the things that are happening around in the labor market at their end? Yeah. I think managers and executives have been under great pressure even before Yeah, why so? Because when I turn back the time past a year in March 2020, the big topic until then was digital transformation. And quite a few of those things that we've been seeing and discussing, like artificial intelligence, for example, what effect would it have on business models, on the workforce of the company. Yeah? This was very strongly on the agenda of our target groups then already. Yeah, so they were quite busy, and all of that in what we call the VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Yeah, so even then, life of executives was not was quite challenging, because they had to come up with new business models. Yeah, so what does it mean if I implement AI into my processes? If those fintechs come up because they have the smarter technological approach to disrupt my value chain, going to more agile leadership and collaboration techniques. Yeah, if you want to be competitive against those small, lean fintechs as a big incumbent in insurance or in banking, you have to also change the mechanisms of how you work. Yeah. So even then, our target groups had to be were challenged at multiple levels. Yeah, finding new business models to make sure that their companies survive, finding new leadership models to make sure that their teams work well towards that goal, but also at the same time making sure that they as individuals survive, yeah, to develop this certain level of resilience. And I think it was very interesting to see when you noticed in the chat, what have you learned over the past years? Many of those, skills or competences resonated really strongly with me, because I think I fully agree with you on that. And to make things even a little bit more pointed, I think all of that has happened at unprecedented speed. Yeah, and if I would take an analogy of a technology that has changed our lives, thinking of cars, for example, to take one, it took us around 60 years to get adjusted to that technology. Yeah, meaning finding rules and regulations, how cars and operate in the streets, and who else is there in the street, and how can we have a fruitful togetherness there, to build our cities accordingly, to make sure that people who are using cars know what they're doing. So there is a whole framework and setup around these technologies that make us comfortable today to say, okay, we know how this car thing works. Yeah. With digital transformation, these developments are much more complex and rapid at the same time. Yeah, so look into artificial intelligence, how the technology has picked up over the last like 5 to 10 years, where it's ingrained today already, the potential that we cannot even grasp, and at many different ends and levels, we're still kind of, following behind, trying to make sense out of it, trying to use it in a fruitful and ethical way, and so on. Yeah, so I think the challenges were already quite substantial. The speed of those challenges quite substantial. So even before the pandemic started out, executives and managers or mid-level managers were already quite burdened, so to speak. So how do we address that along those 3 different dimensions? Of course, we try to contribute through education, by building knowledge around those technologies, how to redesign business models, etc. On a leadership perspective, and also working on digital transformation, that has been a big part, and Anu has mentioned that it's also about reskilling. Yeah, so if you are a responsible leader, and that's another strong opinion that we have, we want to build responsible or contribute to responsible leadership in our programs, then it's a lot about also what do you do with those people who are with you already, and how can you make sure that they will have a good future in your company. What we also before the pandemic have stressed, and we called it the so-called pioneer qualities, and many of the things that you've mentioned up front, I would categorize as such, and we pick the astronaut as an icon for that. If you think back into the 1960s, first people who were landing on the moon, their IT, equipment now fits into a mobile phone. So they definitely needed more qualities in this uncertain environment, like resilience, openness, courage. And I think this is also something, and we felt it before the pandemic, this is something that you need in such a leadership role to manage the challenges that are ahead of you. So what happened since March 2020 for us, or for the way how we are looking at those different challenges? Well, first of all, I think we all have to realize that with all the challenges we were facing at different ends over the past year and will be facing in the next years to come, we are to a certain extent blessed that the pandemic hit us at the point in time where we had all this technological equipment, know-how, and so on. So think of what would be our world like if the same pandemic of that extent had hit us about 20 years in the past. Yeah, I think that would be a whole different story. So I think that's despite all the challenges and the exhaustion that we're all experiencing, I think realizing that, I think, helps sometimes. What does it mean for our career skills, educational development programs? Well, the topics from before COVID, like digital transformation, are still around. Yeah, so this has not gone away and is replaced by the challenges of remote work. No, it adds on top. Yeah. And I think the big challenge when I think about my picture from the beginning is how do we get over this chasm, is how do we get it from an emergency mode that we trained over the last year into a steady state at a different level. I think I'm not telling you anything new that remote work is here to stay. We saw it for the different also professional categories or types of work from Anu. That was really insightful. And we are probably catering to those 25% that you highlighted, but those 25% might be responsible for the other 50 or 60%. So I think it's important to get the full picture here. What I see helping us in that situation is that many companies had to make it happen in a real life experiment. Yeah, and that means companies had the opportunities to try out different things because they had to. Yeah, and I think they will push further. Not sure whether the cost reason that I mentioned here is really a good argument for that, because we also have experienced the downsides of remote work and how much it needs and how much we need the physical interaction in the office space, etc. And I think employees will push for it because they also see advantages for that. So remote work definitely from all perspectives, for those who can, will stay. So what does it need in terms of our educational programs, and where do we see, how do we need to reshape them? Or I think it's again about knowledge, yeah, how to set up organizational structures, yeah, what we coming out of this emergency situation, trying to find out what has worked, how can we build from here, how can we implement it into a structural organizational design and setup, yeah. How can we also, use this new knowledge that we have generated over the past year to re-emphasize more collaborative leadership? Yeah, and I think that goes along the lines of, to a certain extent, we also see an empowerment of employees saying, okay, no, I've made it work now from home. So how do we go from here? So we don't go back to where we were, where you tell me what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. And at the other end, this collaboration in the workplace, I think also can unleash some new potential, yeah, and mitigate probably also the challenges that we find on an individual level. Talking about leading yourself, I think we all have experienced that if you're working and collaborating and you have a leadership role, then it needs extensive communication and communication skills. Yeah, so you highlighted empathy and all of those things. I think they all need to be there. They are prerequisite, but then you need to reach out and show this empathy also through your actions and your communication in the company context. What do we expect afterwards? Yeah, and I think it's ideas. We are not at the other side of the chasm yet. From my perspective, we have a view of what's ahead of us. I think it will definitely not become easier or more relaxed for the managers and executives we are working with. The pandemic has been an accelerator to trends and developments. But, and I hope that's the good news, I think that co-creation and co-design can help bringing new formats into companies, also enable those who are at the receiving end of remote work get themselves heard. So collaboration might be more fruitful and helpful than competition in that context. And coming back to the career aspect, I think career development may becoming more challenging. Yeah, so how to be seen under remote work conditions as, from an executive perspective for my own career, but also who do I promote? Those who are in my visibility, and therefore remote work probably has another challenge for career development. And I think, communication skills and the extent will become more crucial than ever. So probably more questions than answers that I could provide you with. I hope I could share where we stand as an executive education institution, but also what's going on the hearts and minds of our target groups. And I'm very much looking forward to a great discussion and to also learning a lot from you at this point. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Very insightful slides, and your presentation also brings a lot of questions, because of course the topic we discussed today is not an easy one. Please go ahead and write your questions in the chat. I see some of them already there, and we will make a note of them. And to start the discussion, we have today as a discussant, we have Köttritsch. Please correct me if I mispronounce the surname, Michael.
That's fine. Thank you for having me.
And Michael is the head of management and careers at Die Presse newspaper. Hello, Michael.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it was great listening to you, Arno, and to you, Barbara. Many insights. And when I talk to leaders in my profession as a journalist, that's exactly what they tell me. They see an immense desire to return to the offices right now, and at the same time they have the need and the wish of the employees to stay at home, to be able and to be allowed to work remotely. On the other hand side, there are many leaders who wish their employees back to the offices because they have lost this social component. They have a feeling of losing control what their employees are doing, and some of them, I think, they have the feeling of losing a stage to show what they can, and a place where they can perform and show their skills as leaders. We were very much talking about skills, and yes, I totally agree that digitalization speeded up the whole thing, but I think we must not overestimate the digital capacities and capabilities of employees. I think we do have a lot of pseudo digitalization, where processes are not really digital at the moment, only parts of those processes. For example, if you have to scan an invoice to make it processable, then it is not a real digital process, and it's rather a pseudo digital process. And as the motto of this event today, the skills, do we need new skills? Well, I don't know. I think yes and no. I think we need more digital skills, and more so we need a digital mindset that focuses on doing things digitally. This is more than just translating things into a digital world. We must get over doing things digitally that we did before in an analog way. And as mentioned before, we cannot have good enough communication skills and emotional skills. And Arno talked about technological skills, and I'm sure we have to improve. That doesn't mean that everybody has to be able to be coding. We should more and more get this digital mindset to see how the processes are. And there's one point I was told by several leaders that they see that our labor contracts, as we have known them in the past, are a bit changing. At the moment, we are owing our time and the will to do things right and achieve the best result, but we're not owing a certain result. And what we are seeing is that this traditional labor contracts are more and more going to become service contracts where you owe a certain result. And this is something that is not discussed within all the remote working thing, and it has to do with trust and it has to do with controlling. So that's a short insight in what leaders are telling me within the interviews.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the three of you. Let's start the discussion. We will take up the questions that came also from the chat. Let me start with asking you some questions. Did you come across any kind of exceptional success stories or exceptional failures last year where you thought, oh, this guy, he's doing really something perfectly well, or this guy, well, how could you? Any stories, any concrete stories where you would say, you don't need to name them. So no shaming, blaming, or praising, but were there some kind of exceptional stories? The question also goes to Barbara, goes to Michael, goes to Anno. Any concrete stories? Because we've seen so many figures, we've seen so many graphs and charts, but let's put a little bit of flesh on the bones. Any story? Who would like? Anno.
Yeah, maybe just one story. It's not necessarily the most important or the best, but this question of remote work, we tend to think about it in the context of office-based work. And it's very natural and easy to think about it as, you know, what would be the possibilities if we could do office work remotely on a sustainable basis. But I found actually very interesting the fact that several companies I've talked to, and some in particular have exemplified it, are thinking about this in the context of work that's actually very physical location dependent. So companies in the power, energy, utilities space, companies that manufacture very expensive and complex equipment, which is actually installed in locations all over the world, had to innovate to come up with a way to service their customers and meet their obligations through COVID. And they came up with that through a combination of having the best human expertise that was available to do that task anywhere in the world, combined with AR, VR, and AI technologies to really bring the best expert literally in the room, quote unquote, in the room, not physically present, but there in every way, with the data, with the ability to communicate face to face and see what was happening on the ground and have that kind of interaction with the technical team on the ground. But I found that very inspiring because it was, and there are several companies. There's a semiconductor equipment manufacturing company that actually did this globally. There are, you know, power and water companies that are doing this globally. And this is inspiring because it's all about this idea of at the excellence end of the spectrum, how do you bring the best global expertise into the room anywhere in the world and break through all barriers in the process of doing that? And also interesting because there's so much energy coming from companies of that nature. So it's not just banking, IT, or management services where a lot of the remote work debate is otherwise, restricted to.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Barbara, any stories, any things what you would like to share?
Really anecdotal evidence, but what impressed me was the example of one company in Romania. An alumnus of one of our programs is country manager there. It's a multinational corporation, and it is a production plant. Yeah, so this was exactly the situation. You have, of course, white collar jobs, but you have a majority of blue collar jobs in the same facility. And how do you manage to get through the situation in terms of safety, security, management, supply chains, and all of the things that were put on the line at this point. And he's a very hands-on and practical guy, and I think that has helped. Yeah. So when I see what helps in situations like that, he said, okay. Nobody has been there before, and I think this is one of when we look for relief for executives at the moment, nobody's been there before, and everybody's in the same situation. Yeah? And I think that, from a personal perspective, I've seen that this relieves many people in leadership positions. But he said, what could I do? I had no answers to all the questions. So bring together my leadership team who's been working together well, ask them what they would suggest, and they cascaded these questions down to the shop floor, basically. And because they had established a very good communication culture to start with, everybody was willing to contribute to the solution, and this basically helped them to perform. Yeah, so I think what we also see in many studies is the high performers perform very well under these conditions, and the low performers deteriorate, so to speak. And I think that there might be an analogy on a corporate level as well.
Thank you. Michael, any stories?
Yeah, there's one company belonging to the critical infrastructure in Austria, and they started an agile transformation during the first lockdown in Austria. And I have to admit, I admire the courage of those people doing that. That isn't easy if you stick together and if you can see yourself physically, to go on and to try this and to implement agile methods into a team, and they succeeded, and it works well. So I think that the trust level within the team, leaders and employees, is quite high, or must be quite high, that this is working out.
Great. We'll come to your questions in a moment. In the meantime, I summarized or tried to cluster the skills that our participants put into the chat. And as far as I've seen, there are 5 groups, 5 dimensions. It's the challenge of dealing with technology. So it's about virtual reality, visualization, online communities. So it's skills about dealing with technology. It's about self-organization. It's about the self. So it's the thing and it's the self. It's about self-management, stress management, and so on. It's the other. It's dealing with the other. It's the collaboration, the empathy, the trust. So it's the other person, the other individual. Then there seems to be a higher level, which is the system. It's more than the individual other. It's resilience, flexibility, creativity. And there seems to be a 5th element, which stands behind it, has something to do with attitude, humor, courage, flexibility, patience, and so on. So these 5 things came up. Which one is the one that you can train? Which one is the one that you can develop or empower? And where would you say, okay, that's a question of personality, you can't really change it?
I think the technology thing is something you can train for sure. Mm-hmm. I think that's the most easy thing that you can improve. Mm-hmm. The other 4, I think that's a little bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, which ones do you train at EXEC? Self, the other,
yeah,
the
you
system,
told
the
me I
tech,
should not do a sales pitch here, so I try to avoid that one.
No, where
No,
is
but
what is easy to train and what is really difficult? Where can you develop skills, and where would you say, perhaps with 20 years of psychotherapy?
Well, I think at some point, and this is why I'm saying why we call it pioneer skills. I think many people have that ingrained. Yeah, not all dimensions to a top level. Yeah, but I think being aware of it and trying to build on your own strengths to a certain extent. Yeah. And I think this is what we try to bring out, yeah. Because I, from my perspective of being in this field for many years, we focused very strongly on knowledge and trying to get that across, and business models and leadership and things like that. But the person itself, and what's in you and what you can bring out, and where are also your limitations, being aware of that. Yeah, I think this is something that helps. This resilience, I think, is a very important capability or skill, or however you want to call it. Yeah, because coming back to my initial notion, the 5 dimension that you mentioned, that's what one individual should be capable of doing 100% in all directions. Yeah, and that already gives you an idea of how far you can go. Yeah, I think it's a way of protecting yourself as an individual to make sure that you can unleash what you can and your potential in this environment. Yeah, and I think, how can you train? I mean, we're going back to psychology, for example, to highlight, to promote, to support what's in our target groups, or in executives and managers, to bring that out and be aware. Yeah, but also be aware of when you have to back off, so as not to overburden or burn out. Mm-hmm. But if somebody is more interested, I'm happy to follow up with one-on-one conversations on that.
Anno, will these changes from one workplace to the other also require dramatic changes in reorientation, saying you were a tech guy first and now you have to be an emotional guy and you have to learn how to deal with people first? You were just able to deal with machines, or the other way around?
No, absolutely. And Andre, to go back, link this question also to your previous question. I agree that a lot of the technical and technological even skills are trainable and learnable, and we need more focus on how to get that done. I also believe that a lot of the self-management and other management, managing others types of skills are trainable and learnable. But the difference may be that the role of the organization in actually helping you learn and to train people to do that is a lot more, because that's something you learn through apprenticeship. It's also very much shaped by organizational culture and practices and the context you find yourself in, the incentives that are created for certain kinds of behavior, which may be a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, or frankly 30-year process as you learn those things. Whereas you can think about more technical skills in a more finite context and a little bit removed from the organizational context you are in. So, and your last piece around attitudes or intrinsic traits, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think they are important, but I would not like to live in a world where we spend too much time trying to figure out if this person is intrinsically oriented a certain way. Actually, we need people of all orientations and all kinds. We need the optimists and the pessimists. We need, people who have a sense of humor and people who are, more serious. So I think it's about creating those practices and management practices and the culture really that allows you to be the best whoever you are, whether that's a more patient person or a more volatile person. We don't want everyone to look the same. So that's an interesting but challenging set of skill building tasks. And I think that the question around, what will change again brings us back to the fact that going forward, we all agree that things will change, right? The shape of work will keep changing. What's in demand will keep shifting. And therefore, somehow the notion that learning is a process that more or less comes to an end when you're, depending on the country you live in, 18, 22, or 25, or 30. That notion, I think, is behind us now. Learning has to take place through life, and therefore the business, the organization, the type of setup you work in. There were some interesting questions about, will we even have the link to our employer the way we used to, or will it be increasingly fissured, right? But whoever is your ecosystem of working with those people, I think taking responsibility for constant learning of these skills through that lifelong process is the single sort of biggest takeaway and implication from this.
Am I wrong, or are the topics of what people need are still the same before Corona and after Corona? So, or the other way around, Barbara, the curriculums you offer were prognosing what's going to happen in the future.
Well, I wish I could say that. Yeah, that would be a little bit presumptuous. Yeah, but what I tried to get across, I think, is if you look at it from a meta level, I think many of the things have been there for quite some time, and the situations have changed. Yeah, so change, agility, technology, lifelong learning. These are not things that the pandemic has basically created, and now here we are, and that's new. Yeah, I think. It has accelerated, yeah, it has emphasized, and it has made it more clear than ever that we need to focus on these aspects. Yeah? And I think following up on Anu's comment on lifelong learning, I mean, you would not expect anything else from me than underlining that. Yeah, I am in an institution that puts that on the forefront. I think. And there was one comment, how do we explain that to young students? And one of my students is here, by the way, a young student. So if you have some advice for him, then just go for it. But I think, and that's again a much higher level, learning should be fun and something that you're curious about. Yeah, because then it's not cumbersome and it's not burdensome, and you don't think of it, oh, yet another thing on my to-do list. Don't forget about this lifelong learning stuff. Yeah. And I think this is where we can unleash more of our creativity to make sure that this lifelong learning does not come out of a threat because my job is on the line, or because what I'm doing today is not something I will be doing tomorrow. Yes, thank God, yeah, because that means the next 100 years that our young students will be part of the workforce. They will have the opportunities of having 10 or 20 different jobs. Yeah. But that's probably not something you have asked me, but I wanted to share anyway.
But there's another question I would like to ask you. In the past, we had the impression that the company was responsible for any kind of further education. Will this go on that way in future, or will it be the individual that is responsible for further trainings or education or whatsoever?
I mean, I can only say from the participants we work with, and again, we deliver programs in Central Europe, so that's Vienna and surrounding, going into CE, CIS, but also Western Europe. And predominantly for those high price programs, it's always the individuals paying. Yeah, and companies have stepped out of these kind of ventures about 10 years ago. Yeah, and individuals say, I want to keep my options open, so I do not want to be tied by a contract because the company is paying for me. Yeah, so I think, and that might be a selective set of learners that we address. I realize that. Yeah, so there might be a self-selection bias, but for them, you take your own. It's investment in your own human capital, and you take it in your own hands. Yeah, but again, keep that in mind. I'm talking for a certain target group here. On the other hand, I mean, and Anu might be the more competent or qualified person to answer that. Yeah. So in the war for talent, we also know that companies have to, for simple reasons of employer branding, make sure that they provide attractive learning environments for their talents. Yeah. So I think there is no easy answer to that.
Thank you, Barbara. And I would come to the questions we had from our participants. And Michael Breedy had wonderful questions. One of them, I see our research director, Isinova Carlos Sessa, is already addressed in the chat. And another question of Michael Breedy was regarding the historical perspective we had with industrial revolution. Michael, I saw you with camera on. If you would feel like to unmute yourself and ask a question, otherwise I can read it. Okay, I think Michael is cannot do it now, so I will go ahead and read his question. Anu, it was actually addressed to you. He's saying that the conclusion you are leading your presentation is that we will face a long period of structural unemployment comparable to the period of industrialization and people moving from rural areas to urban areas. However, the difference is that this time it will also approach a lot of the classic white-collar professionals. Do you see any way how to avoid past mistakes and already reroute the young professionals and learners to take different career paths?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And a couple of perspectives, right? One is that this risk of long-term structural unemployment has, of course, existed through every period of massive disruption, particularly technological disruption. And it hasn't actually led to really long-term structural unemployment. In other words, workforces have readjusted and new kinds of jobs and skills come up that we did not even imagine. Just looking at the data, about 10 to 12% of all jobs in existence at any point in time did not really exist, say 15 or 20 years prior to that date, right? So new kinds of things come into demand and people learn and workforces adapt. Although the transition period can admittedly be painful, and it depends on how fast everybody adjusts, whether individual workers or indeed organizations which absorb these new technologies and come up with new propositions. So that said, I think we can't afford to ignore mistakes from the past. We need to do two things and simultaneously. One is, I think, for companies and organizations to double down on this question of how do we equip and enable workers for the jobs of the future. And there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of pilots and experiments of how to do that. Many of these need to be scaled up. Large companies maybe can do it on their own. We've seen examples from IBM, Walmart, etc. But maybe smaller companies need to come together in more sort of community or group-based or industry-based efforts along with the public sector to do that. So I do think we need to double down just given the pace of change. And equally, I think more thought and innovation in terms of what sorts of safety nets are we really creating for people. And this is going to be a critical question that goes well beyond unemployment benefits and things like that, but also in separate work, we had looked at all sorts of basic needs that people have and came to the conclusion that if you look at the last 20 years of history across Europe and the United States, what we've seen is that the cost of discretionary consumption-oriented goods has steadily come down, which has improved the experience of the consumer. But the cost of basics, and that varies by country, it's housing in a lot of European countries, it's housing, but also healthcare in the US. But the cost of basics has actually gone up. And the reason I bring this up is to say part of thinking about this overall experience of individuals holistically is to think about what innovation can we do to actually bring, consumption needs and deliver them better, even in terms of the basics of health, housing, and education, which have actually eaten up a lot of income gains that individuals have seen over the last 20 years. So it's a very broad canvas, but I agree that we can't afford to sort of ignore any one of these elements as we support workers through this transition.
Thank you very much, Anu. And we have questions from Edith Juhas, and I see you, Edith. Do you want to unmute yourself, present yourself, and ask your question?
Thank you very much, Svetlana. First of all, I would like to thank for the organizers and all the presenters. It was really very informative. And I really, really appreciate all your efforts in this area. Just in short about myself, I teach subject for now around 3.5 years related to virtual collaboration. So we have quite a lot of context about new ways of working, which, by the way, is since 5 years implemented in the Netherlands. So it's like there are many different contexts going on around the world. And I really liked the notion of having this new ways of work right now, this remote work, as actually sort of like a must, a compulsory reaction to the situation, whereas in the past it was like a nice to have, right, for companies to offer for their employees. So indeed, it's slightly a different environment, I would say, that we all have to operate in. And so that's the reason why I really appreciate your insights. And now coming to my question, actually it is, first of all, goes to Anu. How do you see the role of governments in helping the occupational transition? Can it be that they become sort of obsolete in the educational sector as they compete with agile corporations? Because those agile corporations can indeed set up their in-house skill-based education programs and so on and so forth, which then, of course, produces the ready-made labor force, what they need in-house. So how do you see this role between corporations and governments in the future?
I think in some ways, the answer is just going to be a stepped up role, actually, for both constituencies, as well as more collaboration between them or partnerships between them. When I say stepped up role, I think it's certainly true that in the spirit of lifelong learning, organizations will have to step up how they shape this and work with educational institutions more closely to shape this over several years or decades of their workers' lifespan with the company. But when you think about the government, there's a huge role that the government actually plays in making all kinds of labor mobility more possible. And part of that, for example, is, what are the barriers to physical mobility? It's not easy for all workers. Like, jobs will be created where they are created. You need to be physically mobile to actually move location. There are a lot of barriers to do with cost and physical mobility. There are barriers to do with occupational mobility when it comes to specific certifications, licenses, and regulations. All of these have no doubt been put in place with good reason, largely to protect consumers, for example, or maintain professional standards. But it's time to re-examine how those licenses, certifications, and regulatory sort of enablers or barriers to switching occupations can actually be eased to make the labor market more fluid. So there are a lot of interventions, even outside of core education or training, that the public sector or the government can think about. And I would put right on top the one about the digital divide as well. The digital divide in terms of everything that goes from basic access. There are still 15 to 20% of households in many advanced economies who lack adequate access. We're talking about a productive level of bandwidth and speed at an affordable cost. There are households and workers, therefore, who don't have that, all the way to building the skills. So the digital divide is another one of those public sector or public goods oriented kinds of initiatives that lend themselves very well to what the government could do to step up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edith, and thank you, Anu. Another question is to Barbara, actually, about the education. And I see that Susie Dias is also here with us with the camera on. Susie, if you would like to jump in quickly and to ask the question you have addressed in the chat, otherwise I can read it.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Susie.
The pandemic has shown that some types of quality work are possibility through the home office. Okay, so my question is how the enterprise abroad the country is prepared to receive the home office. For example, I work in Brazil, but I teach, for example, other country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I think, and let me know if I understood your question correctly. But how does this the last year reflect in university teaching? Yeah, and I can answer that from multiple perspectives. But looking at the executive education in that context, of course, it has changed the way how we do things here as well. Yeah, it has helped us to shape much better of what we can do online as we had to, and where online does not make sense. So we've always talked about the beauties of remote work now. We also found out the beauties of working together in the same physical space. And I can only tell you the target groups we look at, they can hardly wait to come back to campus and have a beer together, yeah, or a coffee and discuss and exchange. From a professor level, I think what it has also opened up is much more flexibility in bringing in external faculty into the classroom, as the technology has been upgraded in many different institutions, not just at ours. It has opened up our mind much more to online and what is possible and when it's possible. And I think we're more diligent with the in-classroom presence time for the faculty and also for the participants. And of course, that opens up new opportunities. Yeah, I think probably we would see more of that, what we've seen in the field of IT, where software developers work on a global scale and they just interact with their customers when it's needed. So we might have university professors sitting in very nice locations across the globe and coming into the classroom to give their lecture or their guest lecture. Yeah, so I think also in the education industry, at the university level, we have become much more creative in the way how we look at our work.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer your question, Susie?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Barbara. And I would like to give a word to Doug Gilbert for his questions. Doug, please go ahead, unmute yourself and your questions.
Sure, thank you very much. So I posed two questions, and they're around lifelong learning, essentially. My guess is, and I've been in the learning business about 30 years, so I'm not coming to it as a newbie. I think the way we are doing it is probably going to have to be substantially transformed. And that's an institutional transformation, which looks different. I'm in the US, looks different in the US versus Europe, because we have different levels of institutions. But also an orientation that learning is not just a private good, there's a public aspect to it. And I would like to kind of throw that out, because we're in the situation in the US that if things continue as they are now, we won't be a country in 10 years. And that has to do with years of neglect of education, of reskilling. And we're in that, Europe is not in that dire of a situation. Some countries such as France are close, but nothing like we see here. So that's kind of the question, is how do we get to the next piece? How does the pandemic play into that? How does the reorientation toward digital play into that? Lots of different questions. So I'll throw it out to anybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer?
It's a
Well,
daunting...
I can go ahead, Anu.
Go ahead.
No.
I think I was just going to say that it's a daunting question, the way Doug has framed it in the context of the consequences, right? Which might well be real. I'll just offer a short perspective, which is I do think that one of the things the pandemic has taught us is that with limitations, there is a lot of power in harnessing digital channels. And while everyone would agree that in K-12 schooling, that's not an experiment that people really believe is productive, to send your kids to school virtually, nobody wants to do that, clearly. But in the whole realm of executive or adult education or lifelong learning, it's certainly, very powerful. We also, though, do know that, the drop-off rates associated with MOOCs courses are not encouraging. And also, ultimately, the signaling of what you learn online has to be through your employability, the higher wages and the higher productivity that you get. So if there is a place for innovation, I believe it's at the intersection of those things, which is, can we have digitally enabled learning, which is self-driven, but charted out. Some companies are actually trying to do this, chart out what the program might look like with the prospect of a kind of work or a job at the end. So the certification is valid, it's recognized industry-wide, and there is a link to a certain kind of job that's on offer. And then it's combined with being self-driven. I can do it over 3 months, or I can do it over 9 months or 12 months, depending on my life circumstances. And to really do this at scale. So we might have one company doing this as a tie-up with one university, but the power of signaling is really when it happens at scale. So not an easy solution by any means, but I do think that combining what we've learned about digital education with this need for a signaling certification based approach and some real jobs at the end of it are going to be quite crucial to just enabling what's easily, I think, easily 2 or 3 deciles of the population, right, to move up into those opportunities.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, and you're talking of somebody who's working in Austria, so the public and private education debate is probably not one that's as prominent as it might be in the US. Yeah. So what I'm doing at my unit within VU is a very small part where we actually take money for education, and everything else is paid by the taxpayer. Therefore, I think this is probably, and I hope it continues that way. Yeah, and I think there is a societal consensus that this is a good system. When it comes to education and digitalization and degrees and universities and our roles, I think what we have learned over the last year is it depends on what you want to acquire in terms of knowledge, skills, capabilities. Yeah, when I want to learn a coding language or Python, for example, I don't probably need to come to a university, sit in a class, have somebody tell me what's going on. I can do a MOOC easily, and I think and that's what we've seen over the year. When it's about knowledge, and knowledge is at the core of why people come to our institution, I think online is a really good tool, yeah, because you can do it for wherever you are. You can include synchronous sessions, have interaction, and so on. When it goes more into exchanging experiences, yeah, and I think this is what we have learned over the last year, and many of our programs work that way, yeah. So where the faculty is more like a moderator of the discussion, bringing in theoretical frameworks, but then they resonate within the group of experienced managers. I think that's something where it's really challenging to come close to that effect in the online world, and particularly when it's about networking and establishing networks, yeah, which are a very important side effect, if you so want, of longer standing educational programs. So I think what we probably coming back to, also connecting it to Anu, I think it depends on what you want to train yourself, what you want to learn, and then different shapes and forms and certificates and institutions will be your choice. So I think we will go more into a portfolio of different offerings, and then you have the opportunity to pick and choose what makes sense in your current states of development. Yeah, but I still think, yeah, and I might be slightly biased, yeah, that universities have a very important role to play in that setting. That also longer term programs have a role to play. How do you establish network relationships, trust, if you don't sit together with like-minded peers in a physical classroom for a certain period of time, yeah, and this network is probably also something you can go back later on for different things, yeah. But it again depends, I think, on the certain situation, on the target group, on what you want to learn.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Thank you for the question. And actually, I would like to take advantage of my position to ask a question, which is very interesting for me as a person who tried to avoid any conflicts. I was, one hand, very much appreciate one of the skills underlined by our participants. So our participant, Liz Pfeiffer, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, says that an important skill is the ability to speak up in a non-judgmental way to solve potential conflicts in self-organizing teams, for example. And I thought that we talk in our dialogues, previous dialogues, a lot about the idea of conflict and that we should avoid conflicts in the situation of remote working specifically, also because there are a lot of gaps and misunderstandings in these settings. So my question actually to Michael, because I think in your journalistic background, you have a great capacity in conflict resolution. I came across this article which actually says the opposite, that the conflicts are very important for process of innovation and they're important to drive remote innovation. So Michael, what is your opinion about it?
I was recently writing a book with two colleagues, and we developed the word COCO, and it says cooperation and conflict. There's with any person you can cooperate, you can have a conflict, and vice versa. If you don't have a chance of cooperating, you won't have to have the chance of a conflict. So those two things belong together like twins. Then I may say that as a twins father. I think the ability to speak up in a non-judgmental way is something you can learn. I think that's something you can really train, and you have to concentrate on it, and then you will be able to solve problems. I think it's not that complicated to get along. It's just it's connected with your ability to see things from different perspectives, and if you're able to do so, you will achieve the ability to speak up in this specific way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. We have a lot of other interesting questions in the chat, but I think we will have opportunity to address them in the our discussion groups. But first, Andre, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much to all the three speakers. It has been a very, very inspiring debate. Thank you for the participants, because before going into the breakout sessions, which are open-end, so you can talk to our three distinguished speakers as long as they like and as long as you like. We had some occasions where this took really long, or just a few questions. It's really up to you, but this means that we now go into these breakout sessions and you will not come back. There will not be any reporting back. And so this is why I would like to invite you, if you haven't done now, but by now, register and join our community. You see on this slide the website. And next slide, please, to briefly again announce our three upcoming virtual events. Low-income family co-creation, April 28th, responsible innovation for smart cities, May 5th, and innovation tools for blind and visually impaired people, May 25th. If you register on our website, we will send you dozens of reminders. No, just two. Don't be, we will not spam you, we will not flood you. But however, if you want to know more about it, there will be more coming up on holograms and virtual reality and that stuff. Register on our website, we will keep you informed. So, Svetlana, how does it work with the breakout sessions?
So we will have